So you want to go fish the Mayaca sometime?
I'm sorry.
You want to go fish the Mayaca sometime?
Yeah.
And
I'm ready.
that's 14 miles.
That's fine. Good day on the water.
That's a long ways.
Yeah.
I want to do it. I've thought about it for years, even before I moved down here, but we
Yeah.
can talk about it later.
Okay. Yeah, I'd be more than willing to do it. Heather said she'd go with us.
All right. Well, we have to figure out how we do the shuttles.
Well, as long as we, yeah, I would say we could just take my truck down to Laurel Road, run back up, leave one person with the boats. Because if she went,
Yeah, if we had 3 people.
yeah,
The thing is, you have to be there at like 7:30 in the morning and sign up.
yeah,
They only let 30 people a day, and most of them just go down to where the alligators are.
Okay, so you just have to have the lower lake pass.
Yeah,
Okay, that's not a problem.
I want to do it so bad. I'm dying to do it. I dream about it at night.
Well, let's do it. Put it on the calendar.
Making me some.
Welcome, everybody. All right, Chris, Ron.
Chris,
How you doing?
good to see you.
Oh, it's Mr. Cannon.
Yeah, I grew a beard.
You look much more distinguished. That's so I didn't recognize you.
Well, as you get older, you have to do
You
something.
need to go with Mr. Man.
Well, I tell you,
Yeah, you just.
I was putting them on tonight, but it didn't do any good.
Okay.
If you still are, we'll write it on my website.
Okay, okay.
Oh, boy. Well, I know you guys are sitting around there salting margaritas. Well, I've been all day salting the driveway and the sidewalk. The snow.
It's freezing down here, Chris.
Oh, God, I tell you what, I'm so ready for Florida.
I didn't.
You're not the
Where I grew up got 40 inches.
No.
I'm
Yeah, it
glad-
didn't take me long to become snow.
It might have got to 70 today.
Well, it's supposed to be 50 on Sunday, so I'll be out on the Arkansas chasing some trout again.
I wish I could join you.
It was good. I had a nice day the other day. You know, it's gentlemen's fishing hours from about 11:30 to 3 o'clock, and that's about it.
Yeah. Is Don Pooterball still over there?
You know, Don, somebody just asked me about him the other day. You know, Don's over 90 now,
Yeah.
and I haven't seen him for a year or two. He had some health problems, but you know, he was guiding into his 80s.
Yeah. He was such a great guy, or is such a great guy.
Yeah. I still use his pewter ball caddis, that foam caddis pattern that he invented.
That's an new one.
Caddis patch is not as big right now.
What's that, Jim?
The caddis hatches aren't as big as they used to be.
Yeah, it really isn't. And I think one of the reasons is that the water's cleaner, so we got more mayflies than we used to. And water has pushed the caddis further downstream.
Yeah. Well, that's a good thing.
It's hard to say, you know, that Arkansas is, you know, it's totally artificial flows most of the time until the fall. And that's when I try to get out. I think we set a new world's record this year for the most raptors on the river in one season.
Yeah, it's one of the most rafted rivers in the United States.
It's in the world.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Hmm.
It's crazy. I don't even fish in the summer anymore. It's just,
No.
you know, it's too bad. What they need to do is to section the river off and have some for wade fishermen, some for float fishermen, and then some for the, you know, the rafters. It's a big part of the economy here.
Yeah. Yeah, the fishermen are getting sort of pushed out, but
Full explanations via the BBC website, bbc.com/news, or do download the BBC News app.
Yeah, they did that on the Caney on the tailwaters up in Middle Tennessee, all the rafters. They
Yeah.
finally decided to regulate them. They weren't even regulating them.
Oh, they're regulating them here, but it's too many, and they can't help but run over us wade fishermen, and
Right.
float fishermen run over us too. So I've retreated to the small creeks, Jim. Some of them, Sawachi Creek and Cochetopa and Beaver Creek.
The bat kill was starting to get bad too.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it was more,
affecting me.
it's kayakers, tubers, a lot of tubers.
Arkansas is a little cold for tubing, but we've got paddle boarders now. If you can imagine, Jim, if you can imagine the rapids on the Arkansas, people going down on paddle boards.
well, that's crazy.
It is crazy.
Has anybody died yet?
We lose a couple on the Arkansas every year.
Yeah, every year.
It's usually rafters. It's people who get on these rafts and they go down not knowing how to swim or not swimming very well, and they get thrown out in the class 5 rapid, and they find their body wedged in a rock a couple of days later.
Ugh.
Yeah, and it's just a normal thing. It's like, oh, we only lost 2 this year.
And Arkansas is a big river. I've got to use a wading staff now. I finally had to give in and use a wading staff. It's too tough.
Well, I remember back in the 80s, not many people would go over there because it was polluted so bad.
Yep, all that mineral pollution up at Leadville. But now the fish are they've taken a lot of the cadmium and heavy metal out of the water, and the
Your brother?
grounds are growing a lot now.
Chris, how's the weather out there?
Well, let's see. Tonight it's supposed to be 14 degrees, and we've got about 4 or 5 inches of snow on the ground. Any other questions?
When you coming southeast?
Well, I usually am down there, as Jim knows,
I know,
a couple of
you
years
told
ago
us.
about this time. But I'm doing some daycare for my little granddaughter a couple of days a week. So that's been fun. She's only 4, and she's my best fishing buddy now. She loves to fish.
Great.
So I'm hoping to get down there. I'm supposed to be writing an article. Jim, you'll get a charge out of this one. I'm supposed to be writing an article for Florida Sportsman on peacock bass fishing in the Golden Gate canals. The canals around
Yeah.
Golden Gate, that's a subdivision outside of Naples.
Yeah.
So that's going to be kind of fun. Peacock are fun, but this is going to be like fishing in a suburban subdivision.
Yeah. Well, you'll probably catch some snakeheads or.
Oh, there we go. Yeah.
Well, I found a freshwater lake here.
Okay, you're on.
Before I left, I started some freshwater lakes, and I got a 5-pound peacock, a 7-pound bass, and a 30-inch snook. I don't know what that snook was doing in there, but it's kind of fun.
Yeah. Well,
Oh, Chris,
our
I'm
club,
gonna turn that light off behind me.
our club takes a trip down there in February each year. We go kayak fishing off of 75 for a couple days.
Uh-huh.
And that's a lot of fun.
Well, now you're going to want to come down and fish the Tamiami Trail instead.
Yeah.
Or both. How about both?
Yeah.
We need about a week though, maybe 2 weeks.
You could easily spend a week just hitting a half a dozen of the good creeks along the Tamiami Trail. And then, of course, you've got the whole Alligator Alley, which, a lot of miles there.
Well, folks, do we have any
You guys
fishing
have-
reports while we're waiting on folks to trickle in here?
I
So
caught a
Chris,
couple-
how long have you been friends with Jim?
Well, we actually met down in Florida. I mean, I had met Jim before. I'm sure he didn't remember me. He ran the premier fly shop here in Colorado, and so I
Right.
knew him through that. And then we were friends for a while, and as you'll hear, we almost fell out of friendship because he outfished me one time down here in Florida. So
Oh, no. Well, you just pointed me to the holes and let me get in there first.
Yeah.
yeah,
you're
you
just-
made a mistake of catching the fish before I did.
Yeah, but you caught the bigger fish.
Well, I know. I think you just let me do that because
Oh,
you needed
no.
to ride back to the restaurant.
Chris, I thought fishing was supposed to be fun and congenial.
There are limits. There are limits. And I probably like a lot of you guys. I get more fun now, like when Jim and I went out, just watching my friends catch fish, and a lot of times now I'll be in just taking turns. One guy fishes, the other guy kind of watches, and that's a relaxing way. I'm doing more trout fishing like that these days. Going with a friend, just take turns fishing.
Oop. Ethan, does it show how many people are on right now?
We're up to 20.
Okay.
So.
Hi, Ken. Hi, Ken.
Sports.
Hey, Mike, how are you?
Thanks for the invite.
You're
You
welcome.
you guys don't know me, but I'm a longtime friend of Ken's, and he invited me, and so I'm looking forward to what I might learn tonight.
Plus, the bearded wonder on the screen is my brother up in Massachusetts.
Hey,
probably-
what can I say? 12 inches of snow,
How
Hey,
many?
Chip.
12 or a little bit above.
Well, all right. So Chris, you're going worldwide on this pretty much.
Well, you guys are kind of my guinea pig. I've got a kayak fishing guide to the
video of me. Okay, I'm trying to figure it out.
coming out next year, and so I'm starting to test outreach, that sort of thing. Which is, I'm retired. This is a lot of fun. I'm not doing it for the money, but this will be the first, I hope, of many. This is a great way to connect with people. You don't have to drive a long way, and so yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I appreciate the opportunity to be you guys be the gift big for me.
There you go. Well, Jim's had great things to say about you. So, we won't hold it against you that you've been friends with him for so long, right? But yeah, looking forward to it. Are you
Well,
going
I'll look forward to having, I don't know if I'll be down there in February, but I'll look forward to having you guys down. I'd be great to take a bunch of you out and go down one of these creeks.
You just read my mind. That was going to be my next question. I was going to say, if you're down here this winter, would you mind possibly letting the club hire you as a guide, more or less, to kind of show us the way down that way?
I'll do it complimentary because of Jim. I mean, I'm lucky. I'm probably like some of you guys. I had a good career and got enough to eat every day, and I enjoy riding and fishing. So I'm in a good position to take friends out and go fishing with them, which I love to do.
Okay. Do you imbibe in alcohol a little bit?
Oh,
I can't say anything. I was raised. This is a secret, guys. I was raised as a Mennonite, and if I say it out loud, I could be struck.
All right. I mean, because a bottle of bourbon or a case of some good beer could find its way into your kayak.
Well,
Rum.
Rum?
There's some good
Jim,
restaurants.
is that what he drinks?
There's some good
Rum?
restaurants.
Rum. That's me. That's Mike.
Ah,
My clients.
Jim, so what does Chris drink?
I have no idea.
Really?
He probably has it in a little.
Beer and wine. I'm a blue collar guy. It's just beer and wine.
Okay. Never drink when you're fishing, right?
I don't.
Yeah.
It hasn't started yet, though.
I know a few people on this screen.
Yep, I'm on.
Well, you don't want to be walking around
tell
the
you-
Colorado stream after
Good.
drinking a couple of beers.
That's true. That's true.
Well, and you see these reports in Florida of these guys getting out on boats and drinking and then running into a mangrove,
Oh,
you
yeah.
know.
Yeah, you wait until after you're off the water and then you enjoy it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Safer that way.
Exactly. How we, Ethan, how are we now numerically?
Well, we're at 21 now. I think we had a couple pop off, a couple pop on.
Okay, that'll probably happen throughout the evening. Did you want to start us up then?
So yeah, let's go ahead and get going. Welcome to our December virtual meeting. We're not going to do a fly tie tonight, but we've got a special guest, friend of Jim Canning, Chris Duerksen. Chris is Coloradoan currently, but he winters typically here in South Florida, down a little bit further south in the 10,000 Island area. And he is currently in the process of writing a book about kayak fishing in the Everglades. And we're just tickled pink that he's here to join us and share some of his musings. Chris is a land consultant. Is that what you are, Chris, by trade?
Yeah, I had a firm that did city planning work with development codes around the country.
And there's definitely a slant on the environmental nature of that planning, which I've read in his writings. You can read his writings and musings over at hookinfly.com. He's got a really good blog. He's just put out his top 5 books to read during coronavirus lockdown, and it's funny, I've read about 3 of them during this time, and so I've enjoyed everything from trout fishing in America to 92 in the shade, and he's got some really good, interesting perspective on a lot of these things. And what we're gonna do tonight is a little bit different. Like I say, we're not going to have a fly tie, but Chris is going to present some of the creeks in the Everglades that are close to the Naples area that we can access by kayak and hopefully fish those areas. And after each little session, we'll do a small Q&A, and then we'll proceed to the next session. So Chris, without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to you.
All right, are you going to share the screen right now, Ethan?
Are you ready for it?
Yeah, I'll just go ahead and start. I'll just give me a second, but I'll.
Okay.
As Ethan said, I thank Jim for getting me involved in this. You guys and ladies are my guinea pigs. But I think we're going to see a lot more of this sort of thing, and it's a really great way for all of us anglers to connect around the country. So I'm looking forward to doing more of these. I'm going to talk tonight about 3 of my favorite creeks that I just dearly love. Jim fished one with me, and we did pretty well. Had a long day on what's called the Faka Union River. I'm going to talk about that. The East River and Halfway Creek. Every one of these creeks or rivers has some river fishing in it, but also has some beautiful lakes. And they've got some really nice tarpon, snook, and reds. If you're willing to work for it. It takes a little bit of work to get there, and we'll talk about that. So with that, Ethan, why don't you pop up the screen?
I'm having a little technical issue here. Give me just another minute.
Okay.
So for some reason,
you all know where Naples is located, and these creeks are located on what I call the Tamiami Trail. That's US 41 that runs from Naples over to Miami. And it's just south of the Alligator Alley. It used to be the main road, as many of you know, from east to west down in southern Florida. It doesn't get as much traffic now. It's a 2-lane road. And these creeks are right there. They're right off the road. Hundreds of cars going by them every day. And Jim, I don't know, did we see anybody that day when we fished? I don't think we did. I mean, it's literally some of the days you'll be on the creek all day, and you're an hour from the millions in Miami, from a lot of people over in Naples and Fort Myers, and you just don't see people. So it's wonderful. It's good fishing, solitude. Every one of these trips is an eco tour. I see manatee. I've seen American crocodiles. There we go. So here are the three, Vaca Union River, East River, and Halfway Creek. So go ahead, next slide. You see there at the upper left-hand corner, we'd be about 30 miles east of Naples. And there's a development there called Port of the Island. Some of you may be familiar with that. It's a development out in the middle of nowhere, and I'll talk a little bit about how that happened. But you'll see at the top left of the screen, the Vaca Union River. And then about 5 miles to the east of that on 90. Thank you. You see the East River. And then if you continue on down, cross over Highway 29, you'll see Halfway Creek. These areas, as you can see, there's no development around them. The only town of any consequence is Everglades City, which is in the middle at the bottom of the screen. That's near where I live on Chokoloskee Island. And so you really get an opportunity to get away from it all. I just don't see that many people fishing. All of these creeks are tidal. You can see they run into the 10,000 Islands and into Chokoloskee Bay. And so they're all salt. They're all subject to tides, and the East River in particular has some pretty heavy tides that can make, as I'll talk, can make paddling on those creeks. Now, these rivers are either in the Vaca Union, and the East River are in the Fakahatchee Strand Preserve State Park. So that's a state park that covers the land basically all the way from Tamiami Trail up to Alligator Alley. It's the largest state park in acreage. Got very little development, very few roads going through it. It's the Everglades. And then Halfway Creek is located in the Big Cypress Preserve. And so that's under federal jurisdiction. And we'll talk about that because it makes a little bit of difference on enforcement and that sort of thing. Next slide. Now, I always like to know the history of the places I'm fishing, and I'm telling you, some of you probably know this, but boy, does this area have history. It was known as Outlaw Central in the late 1880s. You probably heard Australia had a penal colony. You know, they sent all the criminals from England to Australia. Well, the de facto penal colony in the United States in the 1880s or so were the Everglades. Because if you committed a crime and you had to get away from old John Law, this was a place to go because people couldn't find you down there. If you want to read a terrific book about the history of this area, it's a true story. It's called Killing Mr. Watson. And it's a story about this guy named Watson who killed Belle Starr, the cowgirl, famous cowgirl in Oklahoma. And the law was after him. So he hightailed it down to the Everglades. The nearest law at the time was in Key West. The Everglades were part of Monroe County. So it took 2 to 3 days for anybody to get up there. Well, he became a very successful farmer. He bought an island, was farming it, and then people started to notice that the guys who would work for him, they'd work for him for a month or two, and when it was time to be paid, they'd disappear. Turns out he was killing them. And so when they found that out, they got scared, and they organized an ambush. 30 guys with their weapons hid in the mangroves outside Smallwood Store, which is still there. You got to go see it if you come to Everglades City. And they hid in the mangroves. And as he stepped out of his boat to get supplies for the week or the month, probably, they shot him. And nobody was ever prosecuted. But by the time the sheriff from Key West got up there, everybody said, we weren't there. We don't know what happened. Anyway, it's fascinating. A lot of the people in the story, the Smallwoods and others, still, their families are still there. The Browns, Kenny Brown runs the marina there. If you are in Chokoloskee Island, you got to go see Kenny Brown and shoot the bull with him. This was the Everglades Creed. that they followed. Suspect every man, ask no questions, cover your kill. Very interesting place. They lived by selling alligator hides, plumes while they were legal. They raised fruit and vegetables, and if you can believe it, they sent the fruits and vegetables to Key West, and then they went up to New York City in the wintertime. That's how New York City got fresh vegetables, from the Everglades. And again, I recommend highly reading this book. If you've got a rainy day when you're down there, go visit the Everglades Museum in Everglades City. It's a 30-minute tour and it's fascinating. Next slide. Well, all that started to change in the late 1800s, 1900s. This guy right here, his name is Baron Collier. He made millions and millions of dollars coming up with a unusual idea. He put ads in subways in New York City, in subway cars, and made millions. So he bought over 1 million acres. He went to the state and said, hey, look, if you name this county for me, this new county that I want, they had to split it off from Monroe County. He said, I'll build a road from the West Coast to the East Coast. I'm going to finish the Tamiami Trail. And you can see in that middle slide on the right, that's one of the dredges that built the Tamiami Trail. If you drive along the Tamiami Trail, you'll see the canal along there. That's where they got the borrow to build the road. So he changed things dramatically. He actually built Everglades City. It was a company town. It's got beautiful historic structures. It's got a bank. They had their own bank, their own laundry, their own railroad station. It was incredible. Part of the town has been washed away, got washed away in early 60s in Hurricane Donna. It's really worth an opportunity if you have time to tour the town. You can see in that lower slide the big boulevards. It's an incredibly planned community. So it was a county seat of Naples, or of Collier County, until 1960 when Hurricane Donna hit and they moved it to Naples. They had 5 feet of water in the basement of the county building. And unfortunately, all the county property records were in the basement of that building. And so today, there's some difficulty finding the title on some of these properties. Next slide. And then in the 40s is when things really changed and it became a fishing mecca. You've probably heard of Rivers of Grass by Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. She helped persuade Congress to designate the Everglades as a national park in 1947. And then Hemingway and Ted Williams, you guys I saw some old codgers here. You remember Ted Williams, the baseball player, all-star. He was a tremendous fisherman. And he put the Everglades on the map. So that was all tremendous change. Now, I will tell you this. If you go down there and get in a conversation with the locals, don't act like you think Everglades Park was a wonderful idea, because those people down there still don't like the federal government. They think they got their land taken too cheaply. So just a caution, we want you guys to be around for the next annual trip. So just don't talk about the Everglades National Park and how wonderful it is. Next slide. Now what's happened lately is in the 70s and 80s, everything was quiet till about then, and then tremendous development. And you can see just above the Faca Union Canal, you can see the outline there of what is a huge subdivision. And you see that? If you look very closely between Alligator Alley and right in there, thank you. That was supposed to hold about 25,000 people. Well, they built Port of the Islands, which probably has 1,000 people, and that was it. Then the federal government started buying it, and they've actually purchased that property where you see those canals. Those are canals, and they built the Faca Union Canal itself to drain all those canals into. When they built the Faca Union Canal, it lowered the water level in this area by 4 feet. And it destroyed the oysters in Fakahatchee Bay. And now there's a multi-billion-dollar project to plug up these canals, to dig new tunnels underneath the highways to allow the water to come down, fresh water in a natural way. It's taken a long time. They've only completed a few of these projects, but they're continuing. So there's some great hope. But the good news is practically everything you see and where you guys are going to be fishing, public property and not under threat of development, which, as you all know, in Florida, there's not too many places like that anymore. All right, next slide. Now, you ladies and gentlemen are all very experienced anglers, but I want to talk a little bit about gear because I've learned some things the hard way. One question everybody asked me, well, should we have a kayak or canoe to come down here? I have a canoe. I got a 16-foot canoe, and I use it on a couple of trips through the mangroves, and the last of my hair fell out. I used to have a full head of hair, but going through those mangrove tunnels with a big kayak was very difficult because they're twisty and turny. So I think there's a big advantage to a kayak. That's not to say you can't use a canoe. The other question is whether you should have a pedal kayak or a paddle kayak. I'm an old guy. I'm over 70 now, and I can tell you I can go a lot further in a pedal kayak. I've got a Hobie Outback, as you can see here. Jim used one of mine when he was down. But you know, you certainly see a number of people pedal as well, or paddle as well. One thing that a pedal kayak is good for, when you get into these big lakes, as you'll see, and there's some very large lakes, they're shallow, but they're big and they're subject to wind. It's much easier to use those pedals to basically fix yourself into a position, or if you get out of position, you just paddle back around so you can cast again. If you got a paddle, I got a friend who uses a double-bladed paddle, and it seems like that's all he's doing. But you can make both work. One thing I want to say, and again, if some of you are experienced paddling in mangrove tunnels, you've got to have two paddles. You've got to have your big double-bladed paddle, but you've got to have a collapsible single-bladed paddle, because some of these mangrove tunnels, they're only 3 or 4 feet above your head as you're going through them, and it just won't work using that big paddle. So I use that single-bladed paddle far more than I do my double-bladed paddle, and you can get those for 20 bucks at Bass Pro. Anchors, I used to use fluke anchors. You know what a fluke anchor is. They don't work very well in these creeks because you throw those fluke anchors overboard and they'll get caught on a mangrove root and you will not be able to get them loose, and you can tip your canoe if there's a big tidal current. Use a mushroom anchor. You all know what those look like. They look like a upside down mushroom. So I strongly recommend those along with rod holders. Now most kayaks come with rod holders built right in. You really need to get those rods up above so they do not, and more protected with a rod holder. And there's several of them that cost $10 online. You can see them at the back of the kayak. You can see them extending from the hull there. And what they do, can you see those? 2 black ones way at the back of the canoe or kayak. There you go. Thank you. You can slot your rod down into those, and they will prevent the mangroves from pulling them out. And I have lost a very expensive rod and reel, spinning rod and reel, because I just was using the holder that was built into the hull of the Outback. Strongly recommend that. Electronics, leave them at home. The mangrove tunnels are shallow. The lakes are all shallow. They're only 3 to 4 feet deep, and you're just not going to be able to use them very efficiently. And finally, bait. I don't use bait very often, but you know, I got to admit, shrimp work darn well. And in this area in particular, as opposed to, for example, in the Banana River when I used to live and fish up there, popping corks didn't work worth a darn. Popping corks work really well down in this area. So you can get shrimp in at Kenny's Marina and other places in Everglades City. Like I said, I don't use them much, but boy, when I do, they work. Next slide. All right, let's talk about lures. Rods and reels, lures, that sort of thing. Rod and reel, I do both spinning and fly fishing, but fly fishing, as many of you know from a kayak, is pretty tough business, and it's very difficult. Well, you can't do it in mangrove tunnels. So I would say I do 75% of my fishing with spin reels. I use two 6.5-foot medium light spin rods, and I use a 6-foot rod. And people say, well, why do you use a little 6-foot rod? It's for casting in the mangrove tunnels. That 6-foot rod, if you do, you also need to learn a backhand cast to cast in these mangrove tunnels. And there's a lot of them in the East River and in Faca Union. I'll just show you, I'll illustrate here. If you cast out from I'm right-handed, from your right side as usual, you're reaching out, and then you've got a 6.5-foot rod, you're going to get snagged. But if you have a 6-foot rod and if you cast a backhanded cast, that's shortening that rod. The rod is shorter, your arm is shorter coming across. You'll find it much easier to make a decent cast in those mangrove tunnels. So I always carry a 6-foot rod and a 2500 series reel. Here's another tip. I used to spend a lot of money on expensive rods, like fly rods up here in Colorado. I've broken more rods in the last 5 years than I have in my entire life. One, big fish, breaking them, or breaking them off in mangrove tunnels. So I don't spend more than $100 for a decent spinning rod. And there's many good spinning rods. There's Berkeley makes decent ones. Scimitar series are good. So be very careful. Fly rods, 6 to 7 weight. One thing that's very important is don't set those fly rods up. On Faca Union River and on the East River, don't set them up until you get to the first lake. Because if you do, you will pull that rod out of the boat or you'll break it off in the mangroves. And again, I know some of you are very experienced with mangroves, and I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but I'm very careful about taking a good fly rod in there, and I don't take it out until and put it together until I hit that first lake. Here's my favorite lures. One you want to get, see at the top there, those two curly tail lures. That one on the bottom is a local one called Mr. Wiffle. It's made by a guy in Chokoloskee, and you can only buy them online. Well, you can get them at occasionally in the tackle shops down in Everglades City, but if you can order them online, and I have to tell you, those suckers work. They have, I thought it was a come on. They have little holes in the tail that are supposed to vibrate. They work, guys. So white Mr. Wiffles are the go-to kind of searching lure. Coming around to the gold lures there, the old timers, when I first got down there, said, Chris, if you want to catch big snook, use gold. And they're right. That's day in and day out for big snook and even redfish in the Everglades. And I think part of it is because it's stained to the water. The gold work fine. You should always have a couple of lipped divers. That's a Yozuri 3D minnow and a Rapala. They very consistently will work. The best surface lure we use down there is the head and spook. You guys, I'm sure, know that. You've got to carry a weedless lure as well as flies we'll talk about in a second. This is the best color for pitching underneath the mangroves. I use what I call a butt dragger hook. It's got a little weight on it with that hook buried into that fluke. And you can cast that under those mangroves, skip it. And I'm sure many of you skip that lure into the mangroves, because particularly on the East River, you've got to get way back under the mangroves. Faca Union, the shorelines aren't, oddly enough, the mangroves don't overhang, but they do on the East River in particular. Next slide. Now for you fly fishermen, you're going to say, well, gee, these are just standard fly. There's an orange seducer, there's some Klausers, there's a Merkin shrimp, but there's two flies that locals swear by. One is in the middle there. It's called a light bulb. It's a local tie. Do you guys use that at all up where you are?
Never seen it.
I'd never heard of it before. It's a dynamite fly. The other one is called Tom's Tantrum. Again, I'd never seen that before I came down to the Everglades. That's the one that's in the lower left-hand corner. So the middle one on top, that's white with that big head, and the one at the lower left. The best advice I can give you guys as you're coming down is stop at Mangrove Outfitters in Naples, because there are no fly shops worth of salt in Everglades City. So you need to have your flies before you come down. You've probably run into that already with your outings on the Alligator Alley. But Mangrove Outfitters is really a premier, very savvy group, and they can fix you up with the local flies. Next slide. Real quick about safety, and then again, you guys are experienced. Make sure you have all the basics that are required by Florida law, the life vest, the whistle, the boat light, because I have been stopped more over the last 5 years than I have in my entire life by rangers. And if they're federal guys, if they're Coast Guard, and maybe you run into this up there, they're going to have machine guns. They're no BS kind of guys. And if you don't have all that stuff on board, they're going to give you a ticket. It's particularly true on Halfway Creek. As I mentioned, Halfway Creek is in the Big Cypress Preserve, which is federal. And Halfway Creek in particular, as we'll discuss, it's the one of these three that you can put a small motorboat on. That means these rangers will be there on the water. So, be careful, make sure you have all that equipment. On most of these creeks, you're in cell service, you get cell service, but not always. And so, because in the summertime, I hike into canyons here in Colorado, I have bought myself one of these Garmin InReach. It's a text satellite phone. You can't talk on it, but you can text. And it has a red emergency button. If you get in trouble, you just push that, and Garmin sends out the local rescue squad. And I'll give you one instance of where I ran into trouble, and fortunately didn't become serious trouble. I was fishing near the Faka Union River on one of the feeder creeks, and I caught one of these darn hard-headed catfish. And you know how those things spin when you catch them? When you try to get them off a hook, they spin. And I'm waiting for him to quit spinning, and he flips up and he jams his big fin right into my hand. I mean, it went way in, and I yanked it out, and I was not too happy. The sky got a little bluer with my language. And about 5 minutes later, I started feeling woozy, and I sat down, and I thought I was going to pass out. And I looked at my cell phone, and I didn't have any service. I happened to be in a mangrove tunnel, no service. I thought, man, I'm in real trouble here. And I thought, I'm going to pass out. There's alligators all around. Well, I was okay. I got back and did research, and those catfish have a toxin in it that is very strong. Won't kill you, but it can disable you. So I went out and bought one of these satellite phones just in case. Like I said, for the most part on these three creeks and rivers, you'll have cell service. You got to have a Florida saltwater license. The only one of these trips, you have to pay a $3 fee at the East River launch. Make sure you pay it. It's a state fee, $3. Pays for taking, there are actually restrooms there. And it gets monitored, so you'll need to have that paid. There's no fee at Halfway Creek or on the Faka Union. Ethan asked me about vehicle safety. I have never had a problem there. However, of course, do not leave your valuables in the car because traffic's going by there all the time. Make sure, what I have heard is friends have had their trailers hauled away. Make sure you have a trailer lock. You know, if you're going to leave a trailer there, got to have it locked down because somebody might run off with it. And if you leave a kayak on the trailer, you know, if you have 2 or 3 kayaks and you're going to use 2 and leave 1, make sure you got a chain lock, a heavy one, because you do read about those things. I've never had that problem myself, but you know, certainly don't want to leave a good, lose a good kayak. All right, let's talk fishing, guys and gals. This is the Faka Union River. You see there, Port of the Islands. That's that last big development in the 70s that got built. And that was the end of it. The federal government and environmentalists started raising cane and they bought all the rest of it out. You see there in the middle, you see Faka Union River. This is one of my favorites. It's only this put in, and it's a developed put in. It's rough. It's very rocky. So you're going to have to be careful not to tear the bottom out of your boat and leave a lot of plastic on the rock. But it's only about 1.5 miles from Port of the Islands, which is about 30 miles from Naples. You go around the bend and there it is. There's parking along the side of the road. There's just enough parking there to put your trailer in. Make sure you don't block the launch itself. As I said, this is one of my favorite rivers. Boy, you never know what you're going to catch. I've caught 33-inch snook. I've caught some nice juvenile tarpon, some nice reds, 28, 29-inch reds, which is big for the southern part of the state. I actually had a big bull shark, a 6-foot bull shark, chasing a spook, and I thought, well, he's not going to eat that, is he? And he's chomping at this thing, missing it. And then I finally decided, wait a second, I better get that lure out of his mouth. But the Faka Union River has a direct connection to the Fakahatchee Bay, which is known for their bull shark. So they're there. You know, if you like to catch shark, and I love catching a shark once in a while, you got a chance, particularly in that first lake. So there's 3 lakes we're going to talk about. There's 2 trips here. You can do lakes 1, 2, and 3 in one day. And then below, we'll talk about lakes 4 and 5. This lakes 1 through 3, as I said, have a variety of fish. One thing I wanted to point out to you, and again, Ethan, if you're controlling the little pointer, there is, you can see on the 3rd lake down, if you count 1, 2, 3 down, you'll see on the west side, there's a little white sort of, that's a creek in there. That's really good fishing, but it's tough. It used to be more open and motorboats could actually get in there from the canal. Thanks to Irma, which I'm actually glad it happened, motorboats can't get through there anymore and nobody fishes it. And it is excellent fishing. We'll talk about that in a second. Next slide. And here's the next 3 lakes. There's Lake 3 again with the creek on it that I just talked about. So what you can do instead of fishing lakes 1 and 2, and fishing lakes 1 and 2 are very good. We'll talk about it in a second. You can hustle down to Lake 3 and fish lakes 3, 4, and 5. And then you see down below there, you can see another little creek coming in from the side again. Look over to the west. Now that's where Jim and I went all the way down there. And when we got down to where the river disappears, right at the very bottom, Jim and I hit a hole of some reds down there in a big hole and had a good time. It's too long of a day to fish all 5 lakes. So you kind of make that decision. Lakes 1 and 3 are terrific. If you want more solitude, you go to 3 and 5. All right, next slide. Now, I know you guys wanted to see my handsome face, but the reason that slide on the upper left is there is when you put in on the Faka Union, you're going to put in at a big lagoon. And most people put in and they hustle out of there. Well, one day I was kind of messing around and I heard snook smacking underneath the bridge. The Tamiami Trail is right there. I ended up catching 7 snook and 3 tarpon that day in that lagoon, and I was able to get under the bridge and fish on the other side. You can't always do that. Jim and I think, caught 5 or 6 before we even went into the river. So make sure you take time to fish that lagoon. Now, the next thing you need to do, you see that upper right-hand slide, that's the tunnel that you're going to go into. You want to put your rods away. Don't try to fish the tunnel. They're too tough. There's a lot of snags, and good chance you'll break your rod. And fly anglers, put that fly away, fly rod away. Now, one other thing, that takes about 20 minutes to go down that mangrove tunnel to get to that first lake. Not terribly tough. You just got to take your time. It gets very narrow. Here's a little secret. One day I was going through there and it was so overgrown, I was breaking branches off. So later that day, I saw a ranger out at the put-in, and I said, well, Jesus, I said, you know, it's pretty overgrown. And he said, well, yeah, we don't have enough people to keep it open. And I said, well, would you mind if I took a lopper in there? And he looked at me and he said, don't ask, don't tell. That's all I'm going to tell you. But suffice it to say, I carry a lopper when I go into this tunnel, because you never know what you're going to run into. You know, it could be a big wind went through and you know, broke some branches off. One point it gets very narrow, but when you come out into that first lake, you're on there on the bottom left. It's like Nirvana. It's a beautiful lake. You come to a point that has some big snook, so you're got to be ready right in you as you get into that first lake. You got to be ready to cast up against the a point up against the shoreline for snook, and I often use a head and spook early in the morning for snook there. A lot of fun. And then I stick to the west side of that lake, and it's good steady fishing for snook and reds. At the end of the lake, and you can see the lake is big. You're only seeing probably a third of the lake. It's a big lake. It's a beautiful lake. Water's in good shape. When you get to the south end of that lake, you're going to hit a mangrove tunnel, and the mouth of that tunnel is loaded with snook. I've sat there and caught 15, 20, one day 30 snook. Nothing was bigger than 2 feet, but a lot of fun with, you know, 18 to 22 inch snook. And then you're going to enter another mangrove tunnel. You can see it's fairly wide. This is a center picture, and that is excellent fishing in that mangrove tunnel. But you've got to be patient. You have to anchor up, looking for a good spot. You might see the fish rising. Then I use my backhand cast, using that short rod, that backhand cast, using that Mr. Whiffle. It's on a 1/8 ounce jig head. Doesn't snag very easily, and it's not unusual to get, you know, anywhere from 6 to 12 fish in that first tunnel. It's not very long. It's maybe a 7-8 minute paddle, and then you'll come out into lake number 2. Lake number 2 is the best shot, I think, of any of these lakes for juvenile tarpon, and you see one there. I almost always catch a couple. I've never caught one bigger than 30 inches, but I've talked to some guides, and they have caught some very big ones. Those tarpon tend to be at the south end of that lake, along with snook, fishing the shoreline there. I have spooked some monster snook there, some probably 3-footers, never caught them. But the moral of the story is proceed carefully down that west shoreline. For the most part, the west shoreline, and I don't know quite why that is, but the west shorelines are where the most fish are. They're deeper, got a little bit more cover. This is also where I had the shark in lake number 2, where I had that big bull shark chasing my spook. Next slide. Boy, this dry Colorado air is getting to me, sorry. Now, when you get to lake number 3, this is a very interesting lake. I think most of us are used to fishing shorelines for snook, reds when you are back in some of these lakes. Lake number 3 is interesting. Most of the good sized fish are on the flats that are maybe 100 to 200 yards away from the shoreline. I rarely catch anything of size against the shoreline. So you're going to have to experiment. I can't tell you exactly where this flat is. I like you guys, but not that much. But you just have to explore and kind of look around, and you'll find it. But you can see my friend here, Steve Spanger. He's from the East Coast, comes out every year. That's a very nice, slot snook. I'm sorry, red. Now there's a great story in this same flat on lake number 2 or 3. The story of the broken rod. You can see my rod broken in half there. Well, I cast out, not expecting there to be any fish out there. I mean, the water is flat. There's no particular rocks or anything, structure out there. All of a sudden, kabam, this big snook hits. I played him. I get him in close. And, I'm sure you guys have had this happen to you. I let him get a little too close and he wasn't quite played out and he took off under the boat. Not a thing I could do. I reached around under the boat, too deep to jump out, and he snapped me off. But being the intrepid angler that I am, you can see I brought him in with that little stub of rod and let it go. It was a 30-inch snook. On the very next cast with a different rod, I got a 33-inch snook. So this lake has got some terrific fish in it. Now, you'll see at the bottom left, there's a wonderful, on the west side of this lake, remember I talked about there's a creek there that comes in on the west side of the lake, and this runs all the way back about 3 miles to the Faka Union Canal in Port of the Islands. You could actually do a circuit if you wanted to. But this is a great spot. It's actually dry land where you can pull your seat out, or you can actually get out of your kayak and eat, or do whatever else you need to do. So I did that. And you see the creek there, it's almost silted in at the mouth of it, but it gets very deep right around that bend. So I did some good fishing there. You can see one of the snook I caught, a very nice snook up that creek. Well, I thought I'm going to really give this a test this time. And what had happened is Irma had blown down some trees, some mangroves. So it was a little tough kayaking. And I thought, well, I'll just wade. So I waded into this nice deep hole and I cast. And sure enough, I got a really nice, I got this nice snook.
Started to realize this whole racket is writing. It's all writing. If you learn to become a writer, you will survive in this business. If you don't, you will die.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Was somebody calling me?
It was some background noise on somebody.
Background, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Well, anyway, so I'm waiting there and I look down and there is a 6-foot American crocodile swimming into the hole where I had been casting. And so now I'm very careful about wading into these deeper holes. Now, crocodiles aren't very aggressive, but anyway, just a word to the wise, if you go into these creeks, be careful for the crocs and the alligators. And I would, given my experience, not recommend wading. All right, let's talk about, let's see. Let's talk about lakes number 3 to 5. Now, again, you could paddle right down to 3, and as Jim and I did, you can continue on down to lakes 4 and 5. They're not quite as good fishing, but when you get below 5, you're in the East River, in the Faka Union River, and there's another creek that flows in, and there's quite a few nice holes, in particular for reds. But if you're going to do that, I would suggest going right to 3, fishing lake number 3, then heading down 4 and 5. In my younger days, when I was 40, you know, I might be up at 4 in the morning on the water and I could fish all 5 of them. It's sort of beyond me now, but for the youngsters in your club, they might want to do it. All right, I'm going to stop right there. Any questions about the Faka Union River or these lakes?
Is there a noticeable tidal flow in those lakes or in the mangrove tunnels?
That's a very good question. I'm sorry, I should have mentioned that. Yes, the East River and Faka Union both have a tidal flow. The good news in the East or in the Faka Union is the rivers, particularly between 2 and 3. It's not a mangrove tunnel. It's a river that's probably 50 feet wide, and there can be a heavy flow. And so what I do in the Faka Union, I have my mushroom anchor. I will get a nice little spot. You'll see that the east side of the river between 2 and 3 has the best structure. And so I anchor up on the west side and I pitch from the west side, sitting there in that current with my anchor down, because you can't hold most of the time. In the East River, it's very difficult, and we'll talk about that in a second. In the mangrove tunnels, generally, not all that bad. It's actually more challenging between lakes 2 and 3 and 3 and 4, because it's not in a mangrove tunnel. It's a wide river at that point. It's getting closer to Fakahatchee Bay. So you got to keep your eye on it. The further you go down, the stronger the tide gets. And the tide in those 2 little creeks can be very strong. So you got to be careful there too. Good question.
Chris?
Yep.
To piggyback on that, are there, on a low tide, would you ever have to get out and drag your kayak or portage or anything like that? And if so, what's the bottom like?
You know, the only time it happens is on a very low tide when you're emerging from that mangrove tunnel. There is a sand flats there, and once in a great while I have to get out, but it's a good solid bottom. You don't have to worry about it. The only other time is the photograph you see here on the bottom left. When you're going into those creeks, there's sandbars, and you might have to pull it over there. But otherwise, no, it's pretty good. The challenge on the Faka Union is that first mangrove tunnel that's narrow and windy, and you know, that'd take you a good 20 minutes to go through there.
Chris, the second question, what about topwater flies, gurglers, things of that nature?
Yeah, they all work. Gurglers, I showed you the one, that big popper. You know, these fish are, I won't say they're unsophisticated, but they don't get a lot of pressure. So the standard lures work, gurglers work. Make sure you have some weedless flies. I mentioned the spin fluke with the weedless hook. Make sure you have a weedless fly to get back under the mangroves where you need to. There are a few spots, not as many on the East River. The East River, the mangroves are heavily overgrown, and you've really got to skip the fly and the lures back under the mangroves. Less so on the Faka Union, but still come with some weedless flies.
Could I ask another question about flies? Are you looking on these rivers and creeks, are we talking some holes that are 8, 10, 12 feet where you would need some fairly heavily, you know, weighted flies to get down, or is this all pretty shallow?
No, there's very few. There might be some that are in the rivers between the lakes where they've gouged out. You know, a hole might be 4 feet deep or so. Now, having said that, I'm just thinking on the river itself, when I sit there anchored up and casting across into some of those holes, I'm using a 1/4 ounce jig and I'm letting it settle to the bottom.
Okay.
So, you know, in the river, yeah, in the lakes, boy, they're just, you know, they're 3 to 4 feet deep at the very most. which means, which means a weighted, or a line with some weight to it and weighted fly. It could be, but you're not going to need, when you go out in the 10,000 islands, you will hit stuff that's 7-8 feet deep, and you've got to get down. That's not the case here.
Hey, Chris. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Regarding the tides, do you ever plan to go put in at an outgoing and then come back on an incoming? Does that help, or is that just not necessary?
Well, I think it does. I'd like to get on the Faca Union. I love it when it's a fairly high tide still rising, and then I'll be fishing on a falling tide. You definitely want some movement. The problem is it's almost impossible to use existing tide stations. There's one at, oh God, I want to say Pumpkin Bay, but that's not right. I can follow up and tell you which one to look at, but it's so different from where the tide station is down in Fakahatchee Bay, because you're up so far that for me it's just, damn, I'm glad I hit it right today, that sort of thing.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Now I want to mention again, there is a marine store on Port of Islands, and they sell licenses there. They have tide charts there for the nearest tide stations. I'm kicking myself for not remembering to mention the right tide stations to look at. There's about a 3 to 4 hour difference in the tide stations out in Fakahatchee Bay and the high and low tides on the Faca Union. But it also varies depending on the season, whatever. So I haven't found any consistent pattern.
I had a question on the mushroom anchor. What weight do you use?
I'm sorry, on the what?
On the mushroom anchor, what is the weight of the mushroom?
Yeah, it's a small one. I think it's it's either a 5 or 10 pound. It's a small one. But you can go with a heavier one. Now I think about it, it's a 10 pound one. But boy, don't use a fluke anchor in any of these creeks or even in the lakes. I've actually had to cut one off. Couldn't get it loose. All right, I better keep moving. I'm going to take a look at the East River.
Mm-hmm. Good.
All right, well, now here's the East River. You see in the middle of the slide up there, the red dot. There's actually a formal launch here. It's a very nice gravel launch that's maintained by the state parks. You do have to pay $3. This is about 4 miles east of Port of the Islands. Again, not very far from the Faca Union, and it's about 30 minutes from Naples. The targets here are snook and tarpon. This is very good tarpon, juvenile tarpon fishing. And have you guys ever, I don't think you have them up that far north. Do you have atomic sunfish up there? Mayan cichlids.
Oh, no.
Yeah, Mayan cichlids?
Very few.
There's some big ones here. I mean, I was raised in Kansas as a farm boy in Kansas. That's where I learned how to fly fish, was for bluegill. And Mayan cichlids down here, you'll see a picture in a little bit. They're just, they're monster bluegill and a lot of fun for fly fishermen. And I want to talk about that because the East River in particular, lake number 3, which we'll talk about in a second, has some really nice Mayan cichlids in it, along with some gigantic gators. Now, the key to this one is you've got to get here early. This last year, they started charging guides an extra fee to do their eco tours. In the past, though, they didn't. So the fee cut down on the guides using it for eco tours. But you need to get there crack of dawn, because if you don't, you're gonna be fishing, and all of a sudden you're gonna see 10 gaily colored kayaks coming down at you and going right over the tarpon that you were fishing for. So you got to get down, you got to get going early. There's two options here I'll talk about. There's lakes 1, 2, and 3, which are at the top. You can see the 3 at the top. If you, Ethan, are you manning the?
Yeah, so this one
Yeah,
here.
there's number 1. There's number 2, the skinny one. And number 3 is to the left.
So
There, right there. That's 1, 2, and 3. And then down below are 4 and 5. There and 5 further down. You can't fish all 5 in one day. You got to make a choice. So we'll talk about that. All right, next slide. All right, here we see lake number 1 at the top. The long skinny one is lake number 2. And the one that the pointer on is lake number 3. You will have a decision point. Ethan, if you can point to lake number 2, the long skinny one. Now come down to the bottom of that. Now come down further. There's a mangrove tunnel, and then there's a little pond. That's the decision point. You'll either go down a mangrove tunnel to the south to lakes 4 and 5, or you'll go to the west on another mangrove tunnel to lake number 3. All right, let's go back, or let's go to the next slide. Here I am putting in at the crack of dawn, and you really need to do it here. It's a nice put in. It's maintained by the state. The other reason I suggest going early, you will see the most tremendous flocks of ibis, herons, storks on these islands. You're going to be canoeing through or kayaking through lake number 1, and I've never seen anything like it. It's like being in Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds. They're just thousands of them, literally. And when you come in at dusk, it's the same thing. It's beautiful. Now, in the first lake, you can fish around these islands. There's snook. I've never caught anything bigger than 20 inches. And it gets hit pretty hard. The other thing to be very careful about at the launch here are there's some habituated gators and big ones, and they're not afraid of people. So you got to be very careful and keep your eye on those gators, because they'll follow you around. So what I usually do is I throw a few casts around those islands, and then I go through a short mangrove tunnel to lake number 2. This lake was apparently a canal, but I've researched the history, nobody quite knows why it was there, whether it was a residential development or farming or what have you. I've caught maybe 2 or 3 fish, and all the times, the dozens of times I've take this trip, that's all I've caught, just a few in lake 2. So I paddle right through lake 2, all the way down until you hit this little pond. See the lower right-hand corner or left-hand corner? That's that decision point. And there's actually good fishing in this pond. There's also, that's a gator skid that you're looking at. There's gators in here. If you continue to the west, you'll go through a little neck, and there's some nice snook there. And then you're going to enter a mangrove tunnel, not too bad a one, you can see it there, that's got good snook fishing for 18 to 22 inch snook. Then you're going to come in, next slide. There you see one of the snook that I caught, not big, but fun in the mangrove tunnel. You will come out at the bottom of that third lake. You're actually going back north now, and you're going to come into the bottom of that third lake, and there's snook there, not very big ones. I've never caught a big one, but there are monster gators. This gator right there, fortunately, we came around the bend and he was right there. Fortunately, it was only about 50 degrees, so he wasn't real active, but you got to keep your eye on it. The fun in this lake is these big atomic sunfish. You can see my friend Bob Wayne, he was fly fishing for them. And they are very big, and there's a lot of them. If you're spin fishing, there's some typical lures that you would use for crappie or bluegill or marabou jigs. Flies, my friend Bob uses one fly. You can see it right there. It's a little minnow imitation. You know, they just tear that thing up. So it's not unusual to catch 20 or 30 of those atomic sunfish in that lake. It's a very big lake. I fished the whole thing only once just because it's so large. But the cichlids are usually, the Mayan cichlids are usually hugging the shoreline. But you can have great fun there. But I usually, next slide, I usually take option number 2. You can see at the top there, that's the bottom of Lake 3 that we were just talking about. There's Lake 3, but at that little pond to the right, that's where you make the, right there, Ethan, you're doing an excellent job, my friend. And you can see there's a mangrove tunnel there. It's quite a lengthy one, and it's a tough one. It has fairly good current in it. I at a couple of the big bends there, I will anchor up and fish, and I've caught tarpon in there. But it is tough paddling. And if you've got a pedal kayak, don't use the pedals in these mangrove tunnels. The East River has the nastiest snags in the bottom of these mangrove tunnels. Got to be very careful if you throw a anchor out. But last year, I have 2 Hobie kayaks, and one of them came with reversible pedals, which I really like. Because if you get a big snook up against the shoreline, you can throw that baby in reverse and winch that snook away before he pulls you into the mangroves. So I bought another one for my other Hobie kayak, an older model. I put it on, I started down this mangrove tunnel, and after about 5 minutes, I ran into a snag that I couldn't see, and I ruined them. I had to pay $150 to these are $400 pedals, and I wrecked them. So if you're going to go through these mangrove tunnels with pedals, get them up. You're going to need a single bladed paddle to get down these mangrove tunnels. But believe me, it is definitely worthwhile. So let's go to the next slide. You're going to come into lake number 3, coming out of that tunnel. There's the tunnel right there that you're going to be in. You're going to come out of that tunnel, and you've got to be very stealthy coming out of these tunnels, because those big snook will lay right at the mouth of those tunnels, picking off bait that's being washed in and out by the tide. And as I mentioned before, the East River has some very strong tides. The further you go down, the stronger it is. But you can see I was casting a fluke, skipping it underneath that shoreline there, and you can see the mangroves are on both of those photographs. You can see they're really leaning out over the water in contrast to the Faka Union. And boy, this big girl hit that thing. I threw those pedals into reverse, and fortunately was able to get a photograph and let her go. But she went about 27, 28 inches. So that lake on the west shoreline has excellent fishing for snook and tarpon, but you've got to get it back up under the mangroves. Now, as you continue down to lake number 4, lake number 4 has some of the best fishing for juvenile tarpon. And for the most part, they're going to be back under the mangroves, but a couple of times I've hit it just right in the morning where they've been out on a flat just before you enter the tunnel to lake number 5. There's another lake. You can't get through there anymore because Irma has closed it off, broke off a bunch of mangrove trees. But at that mouth of that tunnel, there's a big flap there where it's the most glorious sight in the world, where you see these juvenile tarpon that range from 2 to 3 feet, and snook 2 feet to 30 inches rolling out there. And I've had some of the most delightful days. There's less pressure, but you got to get down here early. Again, that's why you know, if you're going to get down the lakes 4 and 5, I'm sorry, you've got to haul down there. It's actually lake number 6 that you can't get to any longer. At least you couldn't last year. That may change. But there's very heavy tidal flow between lake number 5 and 6. It's tough going. So anyway, the East River is got some really dynamite fishing if you're willing to go through a couple of mangrove tunnels and the headache that entails. Next slide. And one of the best things is when you come out at night, it is one of the most fantastic sights you'll ever see is all the herons, ibis, you name it, up in those trees. Literally hundreds, if not thousands of them. So I try to time it so I'm pulling out about at dusk. So with that, let me take a break and take some questions. Well, let me mention one thing. Again, Ethan, you asked me, what's parking like? It's very tight here. When you come off of the Tamiami Trail, it's a 1-lane gravel road that leads to this launch. And there's parking for maybe 4 or 5 trailers at the very most along that road. If you can't park there, there is a county picnic grounds about a 1/4 of a mile up the road with a turnout that has nice parking there. It's a little bit of a hoof to walk back down. But again, the key is getting there early so you get those parking places as well.
What time do those eco tours start rolling in?
Oh, they're usually there about, 8, 9 o'clock. The problem is they're not there fishing. They're just, they're going to come straight down and they're going to head straight into lake number 4. Okay. So that's why you want to get there early, is to beat them down to lake number 4, because they rarely go to lake number 5. It's too far.
Chris, if for the average person, most of the people in our club are, let's say, 60 and on up, how long of a paddle would it be to get down to Lake 5, going straight down?
Well, let's see. Well, I'm 72 and I still do it. I'm in decent shape, but my body's worn out a lot faster than I would hope. Mm-hmm. It's about 15 minutes the first lake, 15 minutes the second lake. That's 30. It's probably we're doing fishing on the way down, because you do want to fish that first pond, and you probably want to make a couple of casts in the tunnel. It's probably an hour to get down there.
Okay.
Hey, Chris.
Yep.
The pedals. I have a Slayer. It's a lot wider than your boat.
Uh-huh.
And it has the propeller pedal. Once you get to these lakes, you could pretty much use the pedals all around those lakes. It doesn't like bottom out and stuff, right?
Plenty. Yeah, you saw that on that one lake, there's a sandbar that I actually like, because I can anchor up there and eat, and take it easy and rest up after the paddle in. That's on Lake 5. But no, they're deep. They're plenty deep. I mean, they're 3-4 feet deep.
And my follow-up question is, can you talk later about which are the best baby tarpons, and maybe I could jot it down for each river spots?
Where the best spots are?
Yeah, like at the end of your thing, go over which ones have the best. Like East River 2 has the best tarpon. I forget the names of these rivers, but.
Well, I'll tell you, on the East River, they're tarpon in 3 and 4, and 4 has the best if you hit it right. I mean, I've gone down to 4. You guys know how it is. Sometimes you get down there and they're just not there, or it's windy. But 3 and 4 are both have good juvenile tarpon. Lake number 2 is the best tarpon in the Faka Union. But there are more tarpon on the east. I'll talk about the 5-foot tarpon in Halfway Creek in a little bit.
Chris, I have a question for you about the fishing licenses for Florida residents over 65, fresh and salt. Is that needed? Any kind of license if you're over 65 and a Florida resident?
Boy, that's a good question. You know, I bought mine. I've got my permanent. I think there is a charge for it, but it's a permanent license. I don't have my billfold with me. That's a good question.
No, there isn't. There's no charge if you're over 65.
You don't need one.
Yeah,
Over 65 and Florida resident don't need a freshwater or saltwater.
No.
that's right. If you're
Okay.
a
Well,
resident,
but I think you have to have proof. I was told I had, and I have a little plastic card that says I'm a senior fisherman in
All you need is a driver's license.
Driver's license, right? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, for $5, you can get it's like a credit card size thing.
That's exactly right.
If you don't want to drag your driver's license out there, you can do that
Okay.
too. But all you need
Okay.
normally
Ron,
is a
that's-
driver's license.
Yeah, Ron, that's exactly what I have, is that $5 one, just so I wouldn't have to mess around and carry my other, haul around the rest of the stuff, because I keep that in a bag and I keep my license on me. The only time I've been checked here is at the launch. So be ready for that, because they check, and make sure you pay your $3 and put your tag in your window, because they do check it. I've never seen any ranger here. It's the state Fakahatchee State Park, or Fakahatchee Strand Preserve State Park, is underfunded. There's very few rangers. So I rarely see that except right here at the launch.
Okay.
Follow-up question, Walt. You mentioned early in the morning for baby tarpon. Do you not see them rolling during the day at all?
Oh, I did. No, actually, on lake number 4 here, I got down there and I had been fishing the shoreline, and all of a sudden I saw them boiling down there. So that must have been at 11 o'clock or so.
Gotcha.
Chris, a question in terms of safety. I'm assuming from what you've said, you perhaps fish by yourself down there, but would you recommend for us, maybe first time going down, or for that matter, anytime, that we pair up and have at least 2 people or more from a safety standpoint?
I would definitely the first time, particularly because these mangrove tunnels are fairly tough to negotiate, as I mentioned. A lot of snags in them, and strong current. Like sometimes you're going to hit it where the current's not bad, but I've hit it where it's been so hard I had a hard time coming back. I hit an outgoing tide, and man, I tell you, I was sore the next day.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. All right, should we try Halfway Creek?
Sure.
All right. All right, now this is an interesting one. Halfway Creek now is about 2.5 miles from the intersection of the Tamiami Highway and Florida 29, which is the road that goes to Everglades City. So you're going to drive east from there on the Tamiami Highway, and you're going to come to the Big Cypress Preserve Visitor Center, which very nicely done. And you're going to go down a road called Sea Grape Road, and then I've marked there that you see the yellow pin. That's where the launch is. It's about a mile drive. There's very ample parking. It's a good launch for kayaks. And this is the one, I threw this in here because Ethan told me, Jen said there are some of you who have motorboats, small ones. you can put a small motorboat on here. And I have a Ginu, and it's perfect for Halfway Creek. You can cover a lot of ground. Again, this is in the Big Cypress Preserve. And again, you want to make sure you've got all of your required gear, because I've been checked here several times by federal rangers, because again, it's part of the Big Cypress Preserve. So this is an interesting one. It's quite different for a variety of reasons than the other two, and it's the reason I mentioned it to you. It's a very interesting trip, and beautiful birds, plants, and we'll talk about that in a second. The interesting thing is here is when you start, you see that long canal. This was another one of those harebrained Florida schemes. And I thought, oh, well, it was going to be a subdivision. No, what it was going to be was they dredged out this canal through solid limestone. You'll see it. And the canal is deep. It's about 7 to 8 feet deep, if not more. And they dredged it out because they were going to have a great big tomato and vegetable farm at the end of the canal. And they needed a way to get the vegetables back to market. So they dug this big canal, and there's no indication that the farming ever took place. It may have, but it didn't last. But you've got this long canal that will take you about 20 to 25 minutes in a kayak to navigate. It's very easy to navigate. So there's no problem with that. It's this lake. The lakes here are much easier to fly fish on, particularly if you got a motorboat. So let's take a trip down Halfway Creek. All right, you'll see there in the upper left-hand corner, that's the launch. It's decent launch for kayaks, and it works fine for a small motorboat, a John boat, or a maybe a small Ginu or a small Hell's Bay. And so you may see boats there, and you got to be careful about that. Most of the people are anglers, and so they keep a watch out for kayaks. You will see some eco tour groups here, but they typically go, there's a big loop that goes almost all the way to Everglades City and then comes back, and they take the loop where the fishing isn't very good. Halfway Creek is called Halfway Creek because it comes out halfway between Everglades City and Chokoloskee. That's where the mouth is. But you can actually do a big, huge circuit that connects to the upper portion of the there's other rivers there. God, it's totally slipping my mind now. God, it's terrible. Barron River, it's named after Barron Collier, sorry. You can tell I'm septuagenarian. It connects to the Barron River. Now that's for the eco tours. That's not something you're going to try to fish. It's too long. So you can see the canal here. On the left side of the canal, as you go down towards the first lake, it's covered with mangroves, and it's very deep. I have caught very few fish there. The fishing is better on the north side, and it's sawgrass and it's shallower. So you can fly fish all the way down and spin fish all the way down. About halfway down, I took one of my friend's sons out, one of my business partner's sons. About halfway down, there's a creek coming in, and that's worth fishing at the mouth. It's deep. It's probably 6, 7 feet deep at the mouth of that creek. It's usually loaded with small snook that are fun to catch. But if you're there on a high tide, there are some very big snook that go up that creek. And if you sneak up that creek in your kayak, you can get into those big snook. You got to be careful for gators. You see the bottom left-hand side, that entire canal, you'll probably see a half a dozen gators. There's some very big ones there. You'll see them out in the water. You'll also see manatees there, and I've seen porpoises up there as well, dolphin, Atlantic bottlenose dolphin. So it takes you about 20 minutes. If you don't do too much fishing, you get down to the first lake, which you see there. It's a big, beautiful lake, excellent fishing all the way around for a snook. It's got very good structure, easy to fly fish, easy to spin fish. And this one, in the evenings, I've had shots at 5 foot tarpon rolling in this lake. Never hooked one. Never hooked one. But I'm going to give it a try next year again because they're there. It's usually in the winter though. It'll be between January and early April. Those tarpon are coming up there to stay warm, just like the snook. The snook and the redfish are coming up into these creeks to stay warm in the wintertime because the creeks are and the lakes are warmer than the Chokoloskee Bay, and that's why they're up there. So lake number one, a lot of fun, excellent fishing. Next slide. So now you're going to see at the top there, you see lake number one, and you see the canal, the upper right-hand corner. You see that where the canal comes into lake number one? And there's a lot of shoreline to fish there. Lake number one is the best, but I've caught redfish in the channels between lake one and two. You got to be careful here for motorboats. You see those big bends in that creek? You've got to be careful for motorboats because some knuckleheads will come around there going 30 miles an hour. And
okay, he's down with he's on 303.
So to be honest with you, what I usually do is I fish lake number one thoroughly. There's a creek feeding lake number one to the upper part of the canal. You'll see that. But I hustle down to what I call Goofy Lake. Now, you know, being an old Walt Disney kid, raised in the 50s, if that doesn't look like Goofy, I don't know what does. So I call it Goofy Lake. Now, when you get down there, most of the eco tours will keep going south. And there's some decent fishing down there, but it's much better. There is a little channel there, right there where I have that yellow marker. And there's some really nice snook in that channel. And then you come out and you fish that shoreline, the south shoreline of Goofy Lake, and that's all very good. The entire south and west shoreline, and then you can cross over. You see there's a little bay about halfway up Goofy Lake. You see that, Ethan? No, on the other side. Other side. Yep, right there. That's very good fishing for snook and for Mayan cichlids over there as well. So Goofy Lake is a lot of fun. Now, when you get to the nose of Goofy Lake, way up, see the nose of Goofy Lake there, Ethan? Right there, you'll see a marker. It's marker number 15. This entire trip at the channel where I told you to go into Goofy Lake, that's marker number 3. Marker number 4 is actually to the south. And the next marker you're going to run into is 14 and 15. That's the return trip. And you've got a tremendous, you can see the mangrove tunnel in the lakes. That's all excellent fishing. And you can get in there with a small motorboat there to the left of where the marker is. You can follow that mangrove tunnel. It's actually quite wide. It's interspersed with lakes along the way. It's good fishing all the way down. And you can go down to marker number 9, which is probably 3 miles down. It makes for a very long day, but excellent fishing there. Next slide. So there you see a nice snook that I caught in Goofy Lake. It's not unusual to catch 24 to 28 inch snook there. One thing I'll tell you, there are very few places to get out of your kayak. Here's a spot where there's I mentioned that bay earlier in Goofy Lake. There's actually a little island there that you can climb out on a tree. There's one other spot where you can get out to eat or, you know, visit the restrooms. But whatever you do, make noise and throw some rocks or something because there's gators up in there. So you got to be very careful. You can continue down after you fish Goofy Lake. You can continue down and you see the mangrove tunnels are fairly wide. Can you fly fish in those? Yeah, if you're a really good fly fisherman and have a lot of patience. But there are ponds further down where you can fly fish. These mangrove tunnels have some really big snook in it. This one here is a funny story. My very first trip down Halfway Creek, I had heard there were snook in these tunnels. So I'm going down the tunnel, I'm floating down the tunnel. I throw my lure, the tide was coming in. I throw my, I think I was using a curly tail, and this big snook smacks it, just erupts, totally erupts. And he's pulling me down and I'm pulling him back. And so I make the command decision, God knows why. I'm 6'3". I bail out of the kayak to get this fish. He gets tangled up in some mangrove roots further down. And I thought, well, I'm going to get that sucker. So I threw my anchor out. I bail out of the kayak. The water comes up to my chest. And it was fairly cold. I remembered having just seen gators a little bit further upstream, and I'm thinking, why the hell did you do that? So I go downstream. I'm bouncing down this stream like you might in a trout stream. The water's up at my chest. The bottom is firm, fortunately, in these tunnels. And I get down to where the snook is, and I reach under, and he's still on my line. I can't believe it. He's still on. One of the reasons he's still on, and I should have mentioned this before, I use 30-pound test line. I started out with 15, and the old guys there said, you're nuts, you'll break off snook. I did, and now I use 30 pounds fluorocarbon. So he's under there, and I'm reaching under trying to get him, and he's going crazy. He's jumping up in the air. I'm trying to untangle him, and by gosh, I untangle him and I get him out. Take a picture, but that was the last time I've jumped out of my kayak, which I would not recommend. It's fairly deep in those tunnels. But they're a lot of fun to fish. You can see they're very clear. There's manatee up in the tunnels. It's really beautiful in those tunnels. Tough to fly cast, but there are ponds interspersed all the way down. Next slide.
Ooh.
And I want to stress, this is a good place if you're going to take your significant other or your kids. This is a good place to take it. The current doesn't get too strong until you get down in the mangrove tunnels. You can see here I was guiding one of my business partners, his kids. They had the greatest time. The mangrove tunnels here are big enough for a canoe. You don't have to have a kayak. Canoes are perfectly acceptable. It's only when you get down further do the currents become ones that I would recommend only for experience. You'll see birds like the roseate spoonbill. You'll see in April, you will see my favorite Florida bird, the swallowtail kite, which are magnificent birds. They will follow you down the stream. And you'll see a lot of bromeliads, cardinal air plants, for example, that live, they don't have a root system. They live, they anchor off of deadfalls and take nutrients out of the air. These are some of the most beautiful plants you'll ever see in April. So April is a wonderful time to go there. You may see them there earlier. I mentioned manatees, and keep your eyes out. There's the same picture of that gator. That guy is there every day when I'm there in the canal, but there's gators all around. So again, I know you all deal with gators all the time, but Halfway Creek has a fair number of them. Again, watch out for the motorboats. What I do when I hear motorboats coming, when I got my kayak and I'm in those mangrove tunnels, I start screaming, and they often will hear you and slow down. But it's a little hairy, when they're running up those things going 20, 30 miles an hour. So with that, I think I will open up again. I really like Halfway Creek. It's one of my favorites. It's easier to fish than the others. Last slide. There's some of the most beautiful sunsets in all of Florida when you're coming there, and you will see, again, hundreds and hundreds of birds coming back to roost in the islands there in the Big Cypress Preserve. Make sure you leave enough time from Goofy Lake to the launch. It's a good 45-minute to hour paddle or pedal. And you can see sometimes I've stayed a little bit too long, and it gets dark by the time I'm at the launch. The other thing you want to do on Halfway Creek is bring the DEET, particularly later in March and April. If you're there, the launch is right by a gigantic marsh, And I mean, they literally will almost carry you off, the mosquitoes there. Once you get on the water, you're fine. But I've given up and I just slather on 100% DEET there because they're pretty serious. So with that, I can take questions on Halfway Creek. I've eaten up a lot of you guys' time. I appreciate your good questions. Let's talk about Halfway Creek and then any other comments or thoughts you might have.
Chris, you've been up to Sarasota before, I'm assuming?
Yeah, I fished up there. I enjoy fishing up there.
Okay, so from Sarasota down to the furthest, which would be Halfway Creek, I believe, what kind of a drive time is that?
I'd say it's about 3 hours.
Okay, and to the furthest one up, which I guess would be the Faca Union, what would that be, 2.5?
Well, it's going to be, it depends on whether you're pulling a boat, trailer, you know, all of that. To get to the Faca Union, the fastest way is to go straight down to Naples. So what is that? That 2.5 to 3 hours from Sarasota down to Naples?
Yeah, probably 2.5, depending how fast you want to go.
Yeah, and then it's another half an hour to from Naples to the East River and to the Faca Union. The fastest way to get to Halfway Creek, if you're going directly there, would be to get off at Naples and go down the Alligator Alley and then get off at Highway 29 and come down that way.
Okay, thank you.
Good driving all the way though. I mean, there's, you know, you're not going to do any forward driving or anything like that.
Right.
Any questions on Halfway Creek? It's a great little creek.
What kind is the water mostly tannic color? Looked like most of your pictures, it was pretty clear water.
You know, it's very clear. It is tannic. Looks, you know, like tea. But, you know, you can get in some situations where the winds turned up a lake. But yeah, it's very clear. There's just no development or anything to, you know, roil it up. The first two, there's no motorboats or any of that. And, you know, with that hard current coming up, Halfway Creek doesn't have the current that the other two have, but that tidal water is fresh. It's fresh in the sense it's clean and clear and flushes out really well. I mean, you've got to be careful because if you're standing up in your kayak fly fishing, you know, I've spooked snook standing up before. I don't stand up very often. Okay. One, because I'm not as nimble as I used to be, but that water.
True for all of us.
Yeah. As far as fly fishing tackle, is just a floating line sufficient? Are there times when you need like a sink tip or anything like that?
I usually carry two. When I'm fly fishing, I would take two. I would carry a sink tip. You don't need a heavy sinking line like you might out in Chokoloskee Bay, but a sinking tip definitely. You know, I'm thinking particularly, I mentioned on the Faca Union River where I anchor up in the river itself and fish out some of the holes. You got to get down deeper there because they'll be sitting on the bottom.
Okay.
Chris, would you say that there's any particular prime months? I mean, does the fishing get good down there like in December, or does it wait till like January when the fish are really pushing up into the warmer water? And how long would that extend?
Well, good question. You know, really depends on the season. Well, I'm usually back down there 1st of November, and the fishing is good then. And then it tails off, you know, as the cold weather hits, it tails off. But it still can be, I've had very good days in the middle of winter. Starts getting better in February. And then March and April are just excellent.
Excellent.
Yeah, and the weather's good there too. You know, the better the weather gets, the more the bugs hit. We've got, just like you guys, the mosquitoes, the no-see-ums are the worst. But they're gone in the wintertime, which is, I shouldn't say gone, but they're less pestiferous.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
I thought Jim would be bragging about all the big fish he caught.
Yeah, he's been quiet.
Jim, did I miss anything on the Vaca Union? I mean, we put in a long day and went way down. No, you're muted.
You're
Jim.
muted, Jim. Oh, you got to unmute yourself.
Bottom left.
Okay.
There you go.
Yeah, it's just kind of place. It's like Colorado high mountain lakes and little streams. You just fall in love with them. And I made the whole loop at Vaca Union over to the canal, and then went up the canal. But then I had to walk back and get my my vehicle. But that's possible. But it's quite a hike.
Yeah, and it's even worse now since Irma hit. There's a lot of deadfalls. But it's just like here in Colorado, Jim. If you work in those creeks, as you know, you work back in those creeks. There are a couple of chains of lakes up there that I've been into that I'm not sure anybody's been in there for ages.
Yeah,
but it's beautiful. It's beautiful stuff, and you'll have it to yourself for the most part.
it's a lot like streamer fishing for big brown trout in small streams.
Yeah.
They're back in the holes, and you just drift your fly down in there and hold on. Then try to control them. That's why you got to have that 30-pound.
Walt, I have two questions.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Yep. I was just going to say, I've got a friend. You saw a picture of Bob White. He fly fishes mainly all the time. I don't fish him all the time because of that, but no, I mean, really, he's an excellent fly fisherman, and he does a wonderful sidearm cast that he gets that fly up under the mangroves. But those of you who are really good fly fishermen, fly anglers, know what I mean. And doing it from a kayak, boy, that's a challenge.
But one thing that I just picked up is a 7-foot 6-inch 8-weight. It's made by Reddington, and it's easy to stow it in the boat, but it's easy to make those shorter casts. The other thing that I have is about a 3-foot ice rod that's basically made for catching lake trout. And I can put a spinning reel on that and get back in and make real, tight casts back in the mangroves. And then it's very stiff, very powerful rod. So you can really put some pressure on, the fish when you have to. But it's only.
I think that's a great idea. I've got ice fishing equipment here that I used to use with my boys here in Colorado, and I thought of bringing it down, but God, if I did that in front of some of my fly fishing friends, I would be ostracized. But that's a good idea. But that's basically using my, that 6-foot rod that I cover or carry. And that's right. Jay, did you have a comment or a question?
Yeah, two things. You said you brought some sort of branch clipping device. Is that the one you usually take palm trees off on a stick?
No. These are little hand loppers.
Okay. Oh, okay. I got you. And then the second thing is
this is the one. This is the one that I don't use. This is the one my friends use. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah.
Of course.
No, there may be
Pruning shears?
Pruning shears.
Yeah, I call them tree loppers. I use it for just cutting branches off. They need to be big enough to be able to go through a mangrove branch that big around. But usually you're going to be in close proximity to them because the mangrove tunnel is going to be over you, and that's why you're chopping it, because a branch is falling down and you can't get through. So you're going to chop that thing off, and I throw it to the side. But now, like I said, unfortunately the state preserve is so underfunded they can't keep the designated. In fact, a union, you see when you put in there, that's a designated launch. It's maintained, but nobody maintains the trail itself.
And what was my question? Yeah, so your friend can clip these things and get you by. When you say break down, when you mentioned break down your fly rods, most of mine are 2-3 piece. Break them down all the way, get them in the kayak nice and tight and low. Okay, this follow-up question is, those long, fat, sharp tooth things that you showed a couple of pictures of, are they aggressive when you're reeling in fish? You said they follow you around, or do they just pretty much sit on the side for us scared
Are you talking about the gators?
I am talking about the gators.
You know, I have never had a problem with a gator there away from the launches, but that they're habituated at the East River launch, you know, because people feed them, and
Right.
it's, you know, it's annoying. But the main thing I watch out for is not to get between a gator skid and a deep hole, because they'll come, you know, bombing out of the sawgrass off a gator skid, and you'll be able to see that skid. Again, I'm sure you've seen them before. And I think they're coming at me at first, and I go, ah, you know, I scream, and then I realize he's just trying to get to safety. The only other problem I've had is with the baby gators, the 2 and 3 footers. When you catch a snook and he, you know, you're handling him up near the boat, they're just curious. They're like teenagers. And so I'm pretty careful about not having my hands down in the water. I use a lipper and try to get that hook out of him and release him as quickly as possible. But I worry more about those little 2 and 3 footers taking a few of my fingers off.
Kind of a cormorant with teeth. So, oh, I lost my last question, my follow-up. Anyway, go ahead.
Chris, you
I have
got
a
her.
question. Can
Go
I
ahead.
ask a question?
No.
Sure.
You had mentioned 2 flies, the light bulb and the Tom's tantrum. Are those the 2 flies you mentioned?
Yes.
Okay. If I Google those, would I be able to see a better picture?
You know what? I apologize. I left all my flies, my tarpon flies and stuff down in Florida. And so I had to get on the internet to take a picture. And that was the best one I could come up with. I apologize. I thought, but it's because it's a local fly.
Right.
You know what you might do if you're really interested, Cindy, is call up Naples or Mangrove Outfitters, and I would bet you they would take a picture and text it to you.
Wonderful. Okay.
What's the name of the second one?
Tom's Tantrum.
I didn't hear you.
Yeah.
I didn't
Tom's
hear you.
Tantrum.
Walt, I imagine you could get away with small clousers and such that imitate big fish, not.
Oh yeah.
Go to that.
Did you get the name of that fly? That name of that fly was Tom's Tantrum.
Mike, like somebody getting all pissed off and having a tantrum.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I tell you, my friend Bob Wayne, the one he uses a lot, you saw that little fly he used for cichlids, for the one that had a big eye on it. That's God, what is the name of that fly? It's done by a guy out of New York. He has it tied, and you can get him online. His name is, some of you know it. It's
Steve Gibson.
Enrico Puglisi.
Yeah.
It's EP
Look at his fly. Huh?
EP Minnow.
You got it. Sorry. That's exactly. But Bob uses that all the time and does quite well with that.
My Acca minnows will work well too, guys.
So one more thing, Chris. I know there's record flooding down there right now, like Shark Valley's closed because of the high water. Do you think that's going to affect your half that you're fishing?
Well, what it's done, and it did this after Irma. It drives the redfish away because they don't like fresh water. And the snook, it doesn't bother the snook, and they flourish. So we have year classes now, from 2 years ago, where the snook didn't have any predators, and you know, the fishing was fantastic. So I think we're going to see good snook fishing. I think the red fishing is going to be spottier this year until that fresh water gets drained out and you get more salt back in the, back in those tidal creeks.
Great,
But-
thank you.
But yeah, the East River in particular has such a strong tidal flow, and the same way with Vaca Union, that I think they're less susceptible to that.
Hey, Walt, the redfish, do you generally find them in the middle of the lakes?
I'm sorry, say that again, the redfish?
Do you find them in the middle of the lakes or in the mangroves also?
I tend to find them more often in the middle of the lakes, but on the Vaca Union, I've caught them tailing in some of the shallows. So I would say generally that's true, Jay, that you're going to get them, I won't say out in the middle of the lake, but you'll get them 30 or 40 feet off the shoreline rather than back under the mangroves.
Good.
Chris, two questions for you. One, there may not be an answer that you want to give or can give. All three fisheries seem outstanding. For us that have not fished that area before, would there be one you would recommend as a starter point to enjoy the day and kind of get our feet wet, so to speak?
Well, both the Vaca Union and the East require skill to navigate mangrove tunnels.
Okay.
And they're not fun, under the best of circumstances, but the payoff is terrific. The Vaca Union, you only go through one difficult mangrove tunnel. That's the very first one. So you got to have 20 minutes of having to navigate. It's fairly narrow. And then that's it for the day. And then you're going to be into 3 lakes that are outstanding. The mangrove tunnels and the passages between the lakes aren't bad. The East River is tough. The easiest one is Halfway Creek.
Okay.
It's a delightful first one. And if you fish that first lake, then resist the temptation to fish the other 2 lakes as you go down and get down to Goofy Lake and spend some time on Goofy Lake and the very wide creek that drains out of Goofy Lake and turns into mangrove tunnels. That's a wonderful trip. So that's probably the one I would recommend to start with. You won't have any difficulty. You won't have to fight through a mangrove tunnel to start out with.
Ray, have you ever gone down the wrong mangrove tunnel and just come to a dead end and the mosquitoes eat you alive or anything? Like me?
Yeah, I haven't done much. I mean, these are the ones I've talked about are ones that are, there's not really any dead ends. The one where where you might think it's a dead end is the East River, when you make that big bend and then you go back up north into the Cichlid Lake, into the Mayan Cichlid Lake. But there's just trying to think. There are some other creeks I didn't talk about that I wouldn't recommend to people because they're tougher than this. But one that you would want to keep an eye out, and you might be tempted to go down, it's called Canoe Route number 4. It is on the other side of Port of the Islands, about 2 miles. And it's a marked canoe route that actually is marked incorrectly. And the first time I went down it, I got in about 1.5 miles and I thought, I'm not going to be able to get through this. It's overgrown. And I just happened to look to my left and I saw what was a channel, and I was able to get Google Maps on my phone and I saw the right way to go. There's actually, if you look on my hookandfly.com, you'll see an article that I published about that first trip in Florida Sportsman. You might take a look at that. Because if you go down that one, you can easily get lost in that one and get in a lot of trouble because there's a lot of shallow, very shallow stuff that you'd have to get out and navigate in thigh-deep muck.
Okay, that's my last question, Walt. Very important question. So you guide these things, right? You take people on?
I do what?
You guide these?
No, I only take, no, I do not guide. You know, people ask me all the time to do it. And, you know, if you guys come down there, anybody from your crew come down there, I'll take you out and
what do you
we'll
do?
have a fun day
February
together.
16th is the follow. February 16th, that ring a bell?
Okay. I don't know whether I'll be down there. It depends on having to take care of my granddaughter. And it depends, frankly, when you guys, I don't know how it is in Sarasota, but the people in Everglades City think the pandemic is a hoax and they're not wearing their masks. The church down there, just the preacher was preaching with no mask saying, you know, we'll be protected by the Holy Spirit. And now he and 9 of his parishioners have the virus, a couple of them seriously. So, you know, I'm an old guy. I'm probably going to wait for the vaccine. So I don't know if I'll be down there.
Gotcha.
God knows I want to.
Chris, another question. If what I'm thinking, this is kind of directed to you as a question, but kind of directing this towards the our club, is we have an outing where we go down to Alligator Alley in February.
Yeah.
We've been talking about trying to do more things with the fact that with the pandemic. I don't know if you guys all agree, guys and gals all agree, but I think to go down there for 2 or 3 days and be able to hit all those tribs would be outstanding. My question, I guess, is, are there hotels in the area, or would we stay in Naples and then go back and forth? Well, any ideas on that or recommendations on that?
Everglades City.
Say that again?
Everglades City.
Yeah, Everglades City has, I wouldn't call them first-rate accommodations, but they're places that I use when I go fishing because I don't care where I'm staying, basically. I want it to be quiet and I want it to be clean and I want there to be food nearby. And Everglades City has that. So
okay.
I'm trying to think of the name of if you get online, you'll see them. You know, East Naples would certainly be if you want to stay at Holiday Inn, you know, chain restaurants or chain hotels that are good quality. It's a very short drive from Naples to all of these places, and you'd have more choices of restaurants. There's only a couple of decent restaurants in Everglades City.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
There's Airbnb also. I stayed in one in Chokoloskee. There's a little
Yeah,
rugged.
you know, that's actually I forgot there's a unit in I have a condo on Chokoloskee, and there's one of my neighbors rents out his condo through Airbnb illegally, but he does it anyway. But yeah, Airbnb probably would have a number, and there certainly are some decent ones in Everglades City. And Everglades City is a fascinating place. You know, it'd be great if you did Halfway Creek and then could still get over and see the Smallwood Store. The Smallwood Store is one of the best tourist attractions. It's an old-fashioned museum, and it's where Mr. Watson was killed. It's right there. You stand right where he was shot. There's actually good fishing right off the Smallwood Store. Another thing you guys ought to consider is doing a creek one day.
Somebody else made.
JT.
What's that? Doing a creek one day, and if you look on my hookandfly.com, you'll see a trip that leaves from the Smallwood Store, and there's excellent fishing there, close in. I also did an article called it's called Chokoloskee Close In. It's on my website, Florida Sportsman article talking about fishing just offshore in kayaks. I'm not offshore, but inshore, right off Smallwood Store. So you could have a really very interesting trip. Do a creek one day, Smallwood Store, Chokoloskee Bay the next day, and then another creek the third day. Another really good launch point is from the National Park Service in Everglades City. They have a launch there for kayaks, and then there's some wonderful islands to fish there, oyster bar islands that are excellent fishing for trout and reds and snook that I talk about in that article. So take a look. It's you can download it for free.
Okay, super.
Yeah, one of your articles was on going up into the Turner River out of Chokoloskee. And I did that one also and caught snook and redfish and a lot of sea trout right up as you go at the base of the Turner River. That's only maybe a half a mile paddle.
Jim, that's a really good suggestion. If you'd wanted that's a very good suggestion. You can launch right there from Chokoloskee from a sandbar, sandy seashore, and it's at most a half a mile, and you can get into some pretty good fish there, right there. So that's an easy trip. That could be the middle day trip. As Jim mentioned, there I published there's a blog on fishing the Turner River.
When you go down these little creeks, I would think that you don't want to go down there with 6 anglers. I would think maybe, what is your opinion as far as numbers of anglers going down in there?
Well, for both the East and the FACA Union, you're not going to want to have 10. I don't know how many guys you have go down there, but I would, the lakes are big enough, Jim. You've been down the FACA Union. Once you get through the canals or the mangrove tunnels, the lakes you can spread out on. So I think you could do 4 or 5, 6 people. I wouldn't want more than that.
Yeah, but like in the mangrove tunnels and the malls and I would think the first 1 or 2 people, or the first one that gets there is going to have the best shot at it. After that, they're going to get spooked out in certain places.
Yeah, right. The first guy or two, gal or two, they're going to catch the fish. But what you can do on the East River, you can take turns. So you let 2 guys fish the first one and then 2 guys to do the next one. And
yeah, I think Ken could probably figure that out for us. Right, Ken?
Who?
You could figure that out, who goes first, right?
Me?
Yeah.
Jim, you're first.
Right.
Is it by age, Jim?
Yeah, by age.
By age? Well, yeah, I guess.
The
Where's Al?
first.
Al, you might have it.
Yeah, I'll get there first. I'm also early.
Hey, Walt, I remember now. So those gator slides are not a good place to stop and take a pee, apparently.
Well, I have to tell, I mean, a lot of people don't realize what those are when they see them. And, I've had some close encounters there because when I first got started there, I got too close to those gator slides I was fishing, and boy, they come roaring out of that sawgrass. And, again, they're not after you, but they could easily upset you. So, yeah, you want to stay away from those deer. I'll tell you the other thing you want to do is, I made a mistake one time. I didn't tell you this one story where I was going up. I was on the other side of Port of the Islands on canoe route number 4, and I came around the bend. Everything was perfect. Tide was going out, and there was this great big sandbar where I usually stop for lunch before I hit this super honey hole. And I got out and I noticed there were some gator paw marks in the sand. And I thought, oh, it looks like it's a small one. So I left my boat there. I waded upstream and fished the hole upstream. It's like waist deep. And I must have got 15 or 20 snook and reds out of this one hole in the creek where it got real wide. And so I went back down and got my kayak. I kayaked back up. I kayaked up further. And when I came back down, there was a 12-foot gator on where I had left my kayak before. And he went right into the hole that I had waded in. So he was probably in that hole.
Oh, nice.
So I'm much less adventuresome when I see a gator slick anymore. Particularly, I used to wade a lot. I love to wade, but I don't know.
Not there.
How about snake?
Yeah.
Have you seen
Snakes?
snakes in there? Yeah.
You're going to see some Burmese pythons.
Oh no.
Yeah, damn things. I was with my friend Bob Wayne, and we were fishing some of the canals near Carnstown, and he says, I got to get out and go to the restroom. And so we're in this mangrove tunnel, and I'm waiting for him in the boat, and he's got out of his boat, and he's up on the shoreline. And all of a sudden, I hear this scream. He had turned around, and there was a Burmese python right there.
Oh,
And I
yeah.
swear to God, he beat Ralph Boston's long jump record in the Olympics. He must have gone 15 feet through the air back into his kayak with a perfect 3-point landing in the sea. But yeah, unfortunately, you're gonna see them. You see water snakes. I haven't seen many moccasins or coral snakes or anything.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen him in the trees in the mangroves above you in the tunnels?
Yep.
Yes?
Yep.
You're talking to
I've got a
someone-
picture of I forgot what the name of the one. It was the most beautiful snake I've ever seen. He was kind of pinkish white. Not a goat snake. I forget what he was. But yeah, I was canoeing down and I went like this, and he was like, his little tongue was darting out at me, and I got some good pictures of him. But yeah, you got to be careful in those mangrove tunnels.
Hey, Chris.
The whole trip. And yeah.
I bet you guys can't wait to go down.
Chris, there's a reason that JT is asking all these questions about the gators. He's a distant relative of some guy, an older guy named Captain Hook.
Well, it's, they're so primordial looking when they're up close and their teeth are out, and they're just like, it's being back in the dinosaur ages. But, like I said, I've learned if you don't bother them,
right.
Except for the guys, in the backcountry, I've never had a problem with it. Well, there is one exception.
So there is one item you didn't mention to carry with you is a bang stick, apparently. You know what a bang stick is?
That's my paddle. I have actually had one of the little guys, he would not leave me alone. And so he came up and I said, come on, little guy. And I took my paddle and I whacked him on the head, and that cured him.
Good thing mommy wasn't nearby.
Well, that is one, when you hear those big males start to bellow, and that usually doesn't happen till later in the year.
Okay.
When it starts getting warmer. But if you start seeing one of those big males bellow, they will be aggressive. I've had that happen when I used to live up on the Banana River. I would stay there. I would fish there in the summer sometimes, and I've had them be aggressive.
Mm-hmm.
Chris, that's a wonderful presentation.
Yeah.
Thank you for spending so much time.
Well, thank you guys.
Outstanding.
We look forward to meeting you in person down here at some point.
That'd be great fun. I really am sincere. I'm lucky to be retired, and I got a couple of kayaks. But I'd love, if I've been down there in February, I'd definitely go out and act as your lopper, and I'm very good at it. So anyway, thank you, Jim. Thanks for the invitation, and
Thank you.
I can tell you got a great group there, and I appreciate you being my guinea pig. I'm hoping to do more of these to, get the word out on my kayak fishing guide. So
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome, but I think in those last couple of stories, you've just helped out the pharmaceutical companies with the sleeping pill sales, because there's gonna be big gators with pythons on their back chasing me in my sleep tonight.
Well, that was part of the presentation. I thought I'd gotten you guys too interested. I thought I better calm them down a little bit. You know, I don't want them coming down here all the time.
Run them off.
Were you serious that in terms of any of these three areas, where Jim asked how many people on our alligator trip last year, we had 25, 30 people?
Too many.
You split up and hit different spots and rotate.
Well, you know, halfway creek, you could do that. And the other thing would be to take a look at take a look at that article I did about fishing off on Chocolosti Bay. You could easily spread out there. There's some wonderful fishing on the oyster bars in the islands right off of the Smallwood store and one of the marinas right there. I mean, literally you're fishing in 5 minutes. And
and the motel is close by.
You're right.
Hey, Bob, what is the distance driving from like the hotels from Naples versus the Everglades City? Did you hear that?
Who are you asking?
Walt, what's the difference in driving distance between Everglades cities to the
Who's
water?
Walt?
I mean, Chris.
Chris.
Yeah, Chris Walt. Chris.
From Everglades City, you would just be 30. You'd be 30 minutes from the FACA Union and the east, and you'd be 15 minutes from Halfway Creek.
So what about Naples?
Well, Naples, you're 30 minutes from the East River and FACA Union, and probably 45 from Halfway Creek.
So it's easily
Easy
doable.
drive though.
Easily.
Oh yeah, it's an easy drive. It's an excellent alligator. I mean, the Tamiami Trail is an excellent 2-lane, very scenic road right through the Everglades.
Thank
It's
you.
a much more pleasant drive than Alligator Alley, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Well, once again, Chris, I want to thank you for coming out, and thank you for setting this up, Jim, for sure. This is a very, very excellent presentation, very informative and exciting. I think we might get JT down there. We might have to give him some Ambien or something, tow him behind us.
Some Dramamine.
I need Ambien to sleep in Ethan's room, baby. Yeah, there's a guide on here, Brian Marcy, I noticed, one of our local guides, and he wrote in the chat thing, excellent presentation before he left. So that was pretty cool.
Can we access this presentation online after we close down?
Yeah, it's recording, and it'll be in the newsletter.
Oh, well, that's very nice of you. I appreciate it. You know, like I said, you're kind of helping me practice up, and I enjoy doing this. And you can tell I like to fish, I like to talk, and you know, and it's great making friends with all of you. I hope I get to meet you guys. I have had so much fun this past 5 years with my blog. I just published I think it was 120th article. And the best thing that's happened is the people I've met, like, you know, Jim and others who've read it and will shoot me a note, and we'll end up going fishing together, or, you know, they'll tell me about the good experience they've had. And, you know, the best thing that I have to tell you, just as an example, and I know it's getting late. I got a note from a young woman. She was in her 20s, and she wrote to thank me. She said, my granddad just died, and he taught me how to fish. And he used to take me out to this lake near Salida, Colorado. That's where I live. And she said, I couldn't remember where it was, but I wanted to take his ashes up to that lake. She said, I got on your blog, and I remembered there was an island. So you wrote something about Island Lake, and I opened up, and there was the island where the island in the middle of Island Lake, where this young woman was taught to fish by her granddad. And, you know, brought tears to my eyes. And I thought, boy, if you can give that gift to other people, like people have given me the gift. My dad taught me how to fish, all that makes it all worthwhile. So, you know, I hope I get to see you all, and just don't outfish me. That's the only thing.
Chris, thank you so very
Yeah.
much. And Jim, again,
Great
thank you for putting that together. And Ethan, all that you do to have these things work out, outstanding for all you guys. And for all of our members, hopefully you had a great Thanksgiving and happy Hanukkah. Anybody that celebrates those holidays, and we'll wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And everybody stay safe and well, please. Looking forward to starting our meetings again fairly soon in person. Obviously, it's going to depend on where things are with the pandemic. I'll also mention, we just had our board meeting the other night, and you'll probably be getting some information from us very soon. Ethan, did you send anything out already on the Fish When You Can, or is that going out?
Nothing yet, but I'll send it out.
Okay, so you'll be getting some information on the Fish When You Can tournament, and also some interesting information regarding dues and how we're going to work that out for this upcoming season, and so on and so forth. So stay tuned, and thanks everybody that made the presentation tonight.
Thank you, Ethan and Jim.
Yeah, thank you.
Look forward to meeting you all.
Chip, safe travels tomorrow.